Yuki-onna, a name that often appears in anime and video games. She is typically portrayed either as a sweet and beautiful bride or as a terrifying monster. But have you ever heard the original story she comes from? Tonight, we bring you the closest version to the original Yuki-onna, as recorded over 120 years ago by Lafcadio Hearn. On a freezing night in a snowbound mountain hut, one man froze to death, while the other, for some reason, was spared. Standing before him was a woman, beautiful, otherworldly, not human. She said, "You must never speak of what happened tonight, not to anyone." Why did she give such a command? We will offer a commentary after the reading, so please enjoy the story. Yuki-onna, Lafcadio Hearn. In a village in Musashi province, there lived two woodcutters, Mosaku and Minokichi. At the time I'm speaking of, Mosaku was an old man, and Minokichi, his apprentice, was a boy of 18. Every day they went together to a forest about 5 miles from their village. On the way to that forest, there was a wide river to cross in a ferry boat. Several times people had built a bridge where the ferry was, but each time the bridge was swept away by floods. No ordinary bridge could withstand the current there when the river rose. Mosaku and Minokichi were on their way home one bitterly cold evening when a heavy snowstorm overtook them. They reached the ferry and found that the boatman had left his boat resting on the opposite side of the river. It was no day to swim across, so the woodcutters took shelter in the ferryman's hut, grateful to find any shelter at all. There was no brazier in the hut, nor anywhere to make a fire. It was just a two-mat hut with a single door and no window. Mosaku and Minokichi fastened the door and laid down to rest, wrapping themselves in their straw raincoats. At first, they didn't feel too cold, and they thought the storm would soon pass. The old man fell asleep almost immediately, but the boy, Minokichi, lay awake for a long time, listening to the furious wind and the constant slashing of snow against the door. The river roared, and the hut swayed and creaked like a junk at sea. The storm was dreadful, and the air grew colder with every passing moment. Minokichi shivered beneath his raincoat. But at last, despite the cold, he too fell asleep. He was awakened by snow falling on his face. The hut's door had been blown open, and by the light reflecting off the snow, he saw a woman standing inside, a woman all dressed in white. She was bending over Mosaku, blowing her breath onto him, and her breath looked like bright white smoke. Almost at the same moment, she turned to Minokichi and leaned over him. He tried to cry out, but found he couldn't make a sound. The white woman bent down lower and lower until her face nearly touched his. And he saw that she was very beautiful, though her eyes filled him with fear. She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she smiled and whispered, "I intended to treat you like the other man, but I can't help feeling a little pity for you because you are so young. You're a handsome boy, Minokichi, and I won't harm you now. But if you ever tell anyone, even your own mother, about what you've seen tonight, I will know, and then I will kill you. Remember what I said." With these words, she turned away from him and passed through the doorway. Then he found he could move again. He jumped up and looked outside. But the woman was nowhere to be seen, and the snow was blowing violently into the hut. Minokichi shut the door and secured it by placing several pieces of firewood against it. He wondered whether the wind had blown it open. He thought he might have only been dreaming, and perhaps mistook the shimmer of the snow-lit doorway for the figure of a white woman, but he couldn't be sure. He called out to Mosaku and grew frightened when the old man didn't respond. He reached out into the darkness and touched Mosaku's face and found it was frozen. Mosaku was stiff and dead. By dawn, the storm had passed, and when the ferryman returned to his station a little after sunrise, he found Minokichi lying unconscious beside Mosaku's frozen body. Minokichi was quickly taken care of and soon regained consciousness. But he remained sick for a long time from the cold of that dreadful night. He had also been deeply shaken by the old man's death, but he said nothing about the vision of the white woman. As soon as he recovered, he returned to his work, going alone to the forest each morning and coming back at night with his bundles of wood, which his mother helped him sell. One evening in the winter of the following year, as he was walking home, Minokichi caught up to a girl who happened to be traveling the same road. She was tall and slender, very attractive, and when Minokichi greeted her, she replied in a voice as pleasant as a songbird's. He walked beside her, and they began to talk. The girl said her name was Oyuki, that she had recently lost both her parents, and that she was on her way to Yedo, where she had some poor relatives who might help her find a job as a servant. Minokichi quickly found himself charmed by this unusual girl, and the more he looked at her, the more beautiful she seemed. He asked if she was engaged, and she laughed and said she was free. Then, in turn, she asked Minokichi whether he was married or promised to anyone. He told her that although he only had a widowed mother to support, the question of taking an honorable daughter-in-law had not yet come up, as he was still very young. After sharing these things, they walked for a long while without saying anything. But, as the saying goes, when the feeling is there, The eyes can speak as clearly as the mouth. By the time they reached the village, they were very much taken with each other. Minokichi invited Oyuki to rest for a while at his house. After some shy hesitation, she agreed and went with him. His mother welcomed her warmly and prepared a hot meal. Oyuki behaved so nicely that Minokichi's mother took an immediate liking to her and persuaded her to delay her journey to Yedo. And naturally, the end of it was that Yuki never went to Yedo at all. She stayed in the house as their honorable daughter-in-law. Oyuki turned out to be a truly good daughter-in-law. When Minokichi's mother died, about 5 years later, her last words were filled with love and praise for her son's wife. And Oyuki gave Minokichi 10 children, boys and girls, all of them beautiful, with very fair skin. The country folks thought Oyuki was an extraordinary person, somehow different from the rest of them. Most peasant women age quickly, but Oyuki, even after bearing 10 children, looked just as young and fresh as she had the day she first came to the village. One night, after the children had gone to bed, Oyuki was sewing by the light of a paper lamp. Minokichi, watching her, said, "Seeing you there sewing with the light on your face reminds me of something strange that happened when I was 18. I once saw someone as beautiful and pale as you are now. In fact, she looked very much like you." Without raising her eyes from her sewing, Oyuki replied, "Tell me about her. Where did you see her?" Then Minokichi told her about that dreadful night in the ferryman's hut, about the white woman who leaned over him, smiling and whispering, and about old Mosaku's silent death. And he said, "Whether I was dreaming or awake, that's the only time I ever saw someone as beautiful as you. Of course, she wasn't human, and I was terrified of her, really terrified, but she was so white. I've never been sure if what I saw was a dream or the woman of the snow." Oyuki dropped her sewing, stood up, leaned over Minokichi, where he sat, and screamed into his face, "It was it was Yuki, and I told you back then that I would kill you if you ever said a single word about it. If it weren't for those children sleeping there, I would kill you right now. And you'd better take very, very good care of them, because if they ever have reason to complain about you, I will give you what you deserve." Even as she screamed, her voice grew thin like the wailing of wind. Then she dissolved into a bright white mist that rose to the rafters and drifted away through the smoke hole. She was never seen again.
Afterword. Why was the truth not to be spoken? Most people probably imagine Yuki-onna as a beautiful but slightly eerie ghost. Romantic, tragic, a haunting love story. But actually, that's not the core of this tale. The most important part lies in the command, "Don't speak." Unless you understand this taboo, you cannot truly grasp the deeper meaning of the story. So, why was he forbidden to speak? This isn't just a typical old folktale structure. It's deeply tied to cultural taboos rooted in Japanese tradition. First, there's the idea that the human world and the spirit world must never fully intersect. In Shinto belief, words are thought to possess spiritual power, and they can shape reality the moment they are spoken. To speak of Yuki-onna's true identity is to make her existence definite. And in doing so, you strip her of her otherworldly nature. As an aside, in Western culture, there's a similar idea. For example, in the Catholic rite of exorcism, exorcists first compel the demon to reveal its name. According to traditional belief, once the name is spoken, the demon comes under divine authority and its power wanes. When something supernatural is fixed in words, it loses its mystery and therefore its force. In any culture, vague and unknown fears often feel more terrifying than clearly defined threats. So, returning to Yuki-onna, the command not to speak can be seen as a protective silence, meant to prevent her from being anchored in the human world. She could exist only because no one knew her secret. This idea that sometimes it's better not to speak might feel foreign to modern sensibilities. But traces of it still remain. In Japan, there's a proverb: "Speech is silver, silence is golden." Being eloquent is admirable, but refraining from saying unnecessary things is considered even more valuable. In traditional village communities, this kind of unspoken order helped maintain social harmony. To speak of certain taboos was to disrupt the balance. So when Minokichi says, "A long time ago I was saved by Yuki-onna," he's only speaking the truth. And yet, in doing so, he breaks a contract with the spirit world. That moment marks the threshold. Once the words are spoken, Yuki-onna can no longer remain in the human world. The final scene is not just about loss, it's a collapse brought on by the power of words. When you look at it this way, the story has a quiet but powerful depth, doesn't it? One last thing. Have you ever said something and realized too late that it couldn't be undone? If so, feel free to share it in the comments.